Well, hello, old man Steve. I got a frog in my throat. Anyway, how y'all doing? I know y'all like for me to tell stories about my past, and so I'm gonna try to do that today. I was thinking the other day about the circus, and I remember when I was a kid, my grandparents took me to the circus, and unless you're my age, you've not been to a real circus. It was the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus. They were the big circus. They've been the big circus for, I don't know, probably 100 years, forever. And they traveled around the country, and it was in a tent. It wasn't in an arena. They didn't have those back then. They had tents, and they would come into town on a train, and it would take them, I don't know, maybe a week to set everything up because it was a big deal. And they would hire local people to help raise the tent, which was always an event in itself. And it usually made the newspapers and everything because that was quite spectacular of the guys pulling the ropes to raise the tent and it going up and everything, because they were huge. I mean, they were just huge tents because my neighbor's out there walking. I saw her out of the corner of my eye. But anyway, that was a big deal. And I remember I was little. I don't know how old I was, but my grandparents took me to the circus, and it was exciting. And it was, well, you went to the circus. I mean, there was, all the animals and the acts and everything, and it was in a tent, and you sat on bleachers. And I don't really remember. The only thing I remember about that was the smell. The circus had a certain smell, and I'm sure it had a lot to do with the animals and their things that they had to do with the animals. But the ground was covered with sawdust, and it was just an exciting thing to do. And they didn't sell all the stuff like they later did. I mean, the only thing you probably could get was like maybe popcorn and maybe some candy or something. They didn't have a lot of souvenirs. But I remember that. And of course, years later, they quit putting up tents because it just became, I guess, too expensive. And they started performing in arenas around the country. And I've seen a lot of circuses in arena, and it's just not the same thing. It's just not the same feeling. I mean, it's exciting. I always loved the circus. And I went up until they quit here just a few years ago. I tried to go every year because it's just exciting. But as a kid, and going with your grandparents and going to a tent circus, that was really something. But years later, I worked in a theater. I sold tickets. I was in the box office and I sold tickets, and it was a tent theater. It was theater in the round. It was big, and it was an old circus tent that they used, and it seated over 2,000 people. I mean, it was big. And theater in the rounds where the stage is in the center, and then you have seats all around it. I guess you all know that. And the guy that took care of a tent was an old circus person. His name was Alex, and he was from Russia, and he had a real thick accent. And it was his job. He lived on the grounds. He had a trailer, and it was his job all summers to make sure the tent was okay and the ropes were tight. And if they had thunderstorms or whatever, he made sure everything was tied down and taken care of. That was his job. But I remember at the beginning of the summer, when they raised the tent, they hired local people to do it because it's a big deal. And it took me back to my childhood when I was a kid and went to the circus with my grandparents. It was so I kind of relived that moment. But yeah, circuses were something. They were exciting, but I guess they just can't do it anymore. It's too expensive. And young people nowadays, I feel bad for you that you don't have the opportunity to see a real live circus in a tent. I know Circus Soleil. I used to call it Circus Olay. They're very. I saw that in a tent. Now they did travel the country recently, and they had their own tent, and it was very special. I saw a couple of times, and that was the closest that you could have gotten into a real circus. So anyway, that's my circus story, and I could talk some more about that some other time. But I think my time is up. I'll be right there. No, there's nobody calling. I'm just funning with you. Okay, y'all have a nice day. Okay, bye.